Welcome back to Echo Horror Files. Before tonight's story begins, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and tell us which country you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's begin tonight's story. There is a sound in the middle of the South Atlantic that has been going for 12,000 years, and for 11 of those years, I was the one paid to listen to it. That is not how the paperwork describes the job. The paperwork calls me a hydroacoustic data specialist assigned to a geomagnetic survey installation. My tax records say I work for a marine engineering contractor. My daughter believes I repair undersea communication cables, which is a good lie because it explains everything a person would want explained. It explains why I vanish for 8 weeks at a time. It explains why I cannot say where I am. It explains why my telephone calls arrive at odd hours through a connection that hisses. The truth is that I sat in a room 400 meters under the surface of the ocean, wearing headphones, and listened to a thing that was not supposed to make any sound at all. My name is Adrian Kohl. I was 47 years old when it started. I am telling this the way it happened, in order, because the order is the only part of it I still trust. The morning it began was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays at Harrow Station were the same as every other day, which was the entire point of the place. I woke at 5:40. I shaved in cold water because the hot-lined D-wing had been failing for 2 months and nobody had priority to fix it. I put on the gray jumpsuit with my surname stitched over the chest. I walked from my quarters to the transit lift, and I began the descent through the checkpoints. There were 9 of them. Checkpoint 1 was a badge and a board guard named Theodore, who had been reading the same paperback for 3 rotations and never seemed to get past the middle. Checkpoint 2 was the pressure lock, where the air changed against my eardrums and my ears popped and the walls made a slow ticking noise as the metal adjusted. Checkpoint 3 was retinal, 4 was voice. 5 was gait analysis, a corridor 12 meters long, where you walked normally and a machine decided whether you walked like yourself. 6 was a full-body scan. 7 was a weight plate. 8 was a manual search by a security officer who apologized every single time and had never once found anything. 9 was the door to the analysis deck, which required 2 people to open, and mine was always Owen Price, because our shifts were aligned and because he was the only person on the station who ever seemed pleased to see anybody. The whole descent took 51 minutes. It was designed to take 51 minutes. Someone in an office on a continent I had not seen in 6 years had calculated the 51 minutes of controlled procedure was the correct amount of friction between a human being and the thing at the bottom of Harrow Station. I have thought about that number often since. 51 minutes to go down. Nothing in the design documents about how long it should take to come back up. The analysis deck was a ring. 22 workstations arranged around a central well, each one facing inward. Each one with the same 3 monitors and the same brand of headphones and the same gray chair. Above us, the ceiling glowed with a light that pretended to be daylight and never changed intensity. Not at noon, not at midnight, not during storms that were tearing the surface apart 400 meters over our heads. Below us, through a floor of layered glass, thick enough to stop a rifle round, was the containment well. And in the well was the coil. Nobody called it Artifact 6 except in reports. Everyone called it the coil, and the station itself everyone called the well, and if you spent long enough at Harrow, you stopped noticing that both nicknames were about holes. The coil was about the size of a small house. It was a spiral of something that resembled stone, the way a photograph of a face resembles a face. It wound in on itself 7.5 times and stopped. And the place where it stopped was the part that people had the most trouble looking at because the end of the spiral did not appear to end. It went inward, and your eye followed it inward, and then your eye was somewhere else in the room, and you did not remember the transition. It did not float. That is the detail people always assume, and it is wrong. The coil sat on a cradle of braced steel like any heavy object. What it did instead was refuse to cast a shadow. You could put a floodlight on it from any angle, any intensity, and the floor beneath it stayed exactly as bright as the floor beside it. 11 years and 4 separate research programs had not produced a single sentence explaining that. It had been pulled out of the seabed 26 years earlier by a survey vessel looking for manganese nodules. The sediment above it was dated at slightly over 12,000 years. In all that recovered time, it had never changed temperature, never lost mass, never corroded, never warmed, never cooled. And every 41 minutes and 9 seconds it made a sound. That was my department. The pulse was low, 22 hertz, near the floor of human hearing, more of a pressure in the chest than a note in the ear. Through the hydrophones, it came across as a long descending tone that took about 4 seconds to complete and then stopped. 41 minutes and 9 seconds later, it did it again. It had done this without variation for 26 years of recording, and according to the sediment analysis, it had probably been doing it for a great deal longer than that with nobody in the ocean to hear it. My job was to log every pulse, amplitude, duration, harmonic content, the 11 partial frequencies that rode on top of the fundamental. I did this for 12 hours a day. In 11 years, I had logged somewhere near 140,000 pulses, and every one of them had been identical. People ask me sometimes, in the version of this story I tell to myself, why anyone would keep a person on a payroll for 11 years to write down the same number over and over again. The answer is that they were not paying me to record the sound. They were paying me to be the alarm that went off if the sound ever changed. Owen dropped into the seat beside mine at 7:50 and put a cup of coffee on my desk without being asked, the way he had for 4 years. "Anything from your rock?" he said. It said good morning. It sounded tired. "That is more than my rock ever says." Owen worked structural analysis, which meant he spent his days trying to determine what the coil was made of, a problem that had defeated better minds than his for a quarter century. He had been at Harrow for 4 years and still had the energy to make jokes about it. I had lost that somewhere around year 6. The briefing started at 8, and Director Halvard Brandt stood at the front of the deck with a tablet he never looked at. "Overnight metrics," he said. "Thermal output constant at 9.1 degrees. Mass unchanged. Field strength unchanged. Acoustic interval unchanged. Teams 2 and 5 will continue surface mapping of the outer world. Team 7 will recalibrate the eastern emitters." He paused, the way he always paused. "Standard day. Standard, stable, unchanged, within parameters." Those 4 phrases were the entire liturgy of Harrow Station, and we said them the way people in old villages said prayers, not because anyone examined the meaning, but because the saying of them was how you knew the day had properly begun. I went to my station. I put on the headphones. I brought up the waveform display and watched the flat green line of the ambient ocean. And at 8:17 and 41 seconds, the line bloomed downward into the familiar shape, the long descending tone, 4 seconds gone. I logged it. Amplitude nominal, duration nominal. At 1 in the afternoon, I took my meal in the common room, where the menu rotated on a 14-day cycle, and Tuesday was lentil soup and bread that had been frozen on a different continent. I ate in 8 minutes. Then I went to the communication booths for my weekly call. Nora answered on the 3rd ring. She was 19. She had her mother's chin and my bad eyesight. and she was sitting in a room I did not recognize with posters I had never seen behind her. "You moved," I said. "2 months ago, Dad. I told you." She had told me. I remembered her telling me. I had written it in the little notebook I kept for exactly this reason, so that I would not become the kind of parent who forgets, and I had still forgotten, because there is a thing that happens to memory in a place where every day is a copy of the last one. Days stop attaching to each other. They pile up loose. "Right," I said. "The place with the noisy neighbor. That is the old place." But she smiled, so it was all right. We talked for 19 minutes. She told me about her second year and about a professor she liked, and a job in a bookshop she was thinking about leaving. I told her about the weather over the cable route, which I invented, and about a pod of pilot whales, which was true because the surface crew had reported them the week before, and I had permitted myself that one honest sentence. At the end, she said, "You were coming home in October, right? For real this time." "For real? Because you said that in April?" "I know what I said in April." There was a pause with something in it. "I am not angry," Nora said. "I just stopped expecting things. It is easier." The connection hissed. 400 meters of water and a satellite and 11 years of careful lying sat in the space between her face and mine. "That is fair," I said. After she disconnected, I stayed in the booth for a while with the blank screen in front of me. They warn you about this during recruitment. They sit you in an office and they explain very kindly that long assignment isolation places strain on personal relationships, and they give you a pamphlet. What the pamphlet does not describe is the specific hollowness of hearing your own child tell you, without any cruelty at all, that she has adjusted her life to work correctly whether you are in it or not. I went back to the deck. I put on the headphones. I logged the 231 pulse and the 312 pulse and the 353 pulse. And at 4:34 and 51 seconds, the coil made the sound 4/10 of a second early. I want to be precise about how small this was because the smallness is the reason nobody believed me, and because the smallness is what frightened me most. The interval was 41 minutes and 9 seconds, not approximately, exactly. 2,469 seconds, held to a tolerance finer than any clock we had built, sustained for 26 years of continuous recording. The engineers at Harrow used the coil to check their instruments, not the other way around. If a timing system disagreed with the coil, the timing system was wrong. 16:34 and 51 seconds. The pulse arrived at 2,468.6 seconds. 4/10 of a second. I sat very still with the headphones on and looked at the waveform on my center monitor and did not move for what felt like a long time. Then I ran the diagnostics, all of them. I checked the hydrophone array, all 16 channels. I checked the clock synchronization against the atomic reference and against the backup and against the surface station. I checked the amplifier chain for phase drift. I pulled the raw data from the redundant recorder in the sealed vault, which used a separate clock and separate cabling and existed for exactly this purpose. Every system agreed. The pulse had come 4/10 of a second early. I logged it as a deviation and flagged it priority 2, which was the highest priority a single analyst could assign without a supervisor's countersignature. Then I sat and waited for the next one. 41 minutes and 9 seconds later, at 17:16 and 0 seconds, it arrived exactly on schedule. I checked it 3 times. I stayed at my station past the end of my shift. The deck emptied around me. The daylight in the ceiling did not change because it never did, and the only way to know that the station had gone tonight was that the sounds of other people stopped. The 1800 pulse was on time. The 1838 pulse was on time. The 1919 pulse was on time. At 2100, I wrote my report. I attached the waveform, the diagnostic results, the redundant recorder data, and a statistical note observing that a 400 millisecond deviation in a 26-year record with 0 prior variants was not an event that probability had any comfortable language for. I sent it to Director Brandt. He called me into his office at 7 the next morning, which was before my shift, which meant he had read it and slept on it and decided the timing of his response mattered. Brandt's office was on the upper ring, one of the few rooms at Harrow with a window, and the window looked out into water. Floodlights on the hull threw a cone of green into the black, and inside that cone you could sometimes see snow, the slow, constant fall of dead things from the surface drifting down toward the seabed. I had always found it restful. That morning it did not help. "Sit," Brandt said. He was 60, silver-haired, and had the particular calm of a man who has spent his career being the person other people report bad news to. He had run Harrow for 9 years. In that time, I had been in his office 4 times, and 3 of those had been about scheduling. "You flagged a deviation," he said. 400 milliseconds. I read the report. It was thorough. He turned his tablet around so I could see it, though he did not need to, because he had my own attachment on the screen. I have already had it reviewed by 2 independent parties on the surface. That was fast. It was flagged Priority 2. That is what Priority 2 is for. He set the tablet down. The review found a plausible thermal explanation. There was a temperature excursion in the hydrophone preamplifier cabinet at 1620, 3 degrees over 11 minutes. Thermal expansion in the cable run introduces propagation delay. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "A delay would make the pulse arrive late, not early." Brandt looked at me. "The cabinet cooled after the excursion," he said. "The correction runs the other way." That is a sentence I have turned over many times since. It is not exactly lie. It is a shape that has the outline of a lie and is technically defensible if nobody pushes on it. A 3-degree change in a copper run of that length introduces a delay on the order of nanoseconds, not 400 milliseconds. 400 milliseconds is not a thermal effect. 400 milliseconds is a car length of daylight in a system that had never blinked. I understood, sitting in that chair, that Brandt knew this. He had a physics background. He had built half the instrumentation on the analysis deck himself in the early years. He knew exactly what 400 milliseconds meant, and he had chosen a sentence that would let both of us leave the room without saying it. So I said, "Understood." "Good." He almost seemed relieved. "Adrian, how long have you been on rotation?" 6 weeks. "And how many rotations without a full break?" 3. "That is against policy." "Staffing has been short." "Staffing has been short for 2 years." He wrote something. "I am putting you down for a medical review with Officer Shaw. Routine. Everyone at your service length gets one. I have been here 11 years, and I have never had one." "Then you are overdue," Brandt said. And that was the end of the conversation. I want to record something here that I did not understand at the time. When I stood up to leave, Brandt said one more thing. He said it to the window, not to me, in the tone of a man commenting on weather. "The interval has been the most stable thing in my life," he said. "For 9 years. My wife left. My father died. The interval did not move." I said something polite. I do not remember what. He said, "It has moved before, you know." I stopped in the doorway. "Twice," Brandt said. 1999 and 2019. "That is not in the archive." "No," he agreed. "It is not." And then he went back to his tablet, and I understood I had been dismissed. And I walked out into the corridor with my heart going hard and the water pressing on the hull somewhere behind the walls. Officer Rena Shaw ran the medical bay. She was in her 30s, competent, and had the manner of someone who had learned that at Harrow the most useful thing a medical officer could provide was the appearance of not being very interested in anything. She took my blood pressure and my blood and my reflexes. She asked me about sleep, which was poor, and appetite, which was fine, and mood, which I described as normal, and about whether I had experienced any perceptual disturbances. Meaning what? I said. Sounds, shapes at the edge of vision, a sense that a familiar space has been altered. Is that a standard question? At this station it is. Then how many people answer yes? Shaw wrote on her form for a while. Enough that it is a standard question, she said. She prescribed a sedative and told me to use it. She also told me in a lowered voice at the door that if the sounds became specific, I should come back and tell her rather than telling anyone else first. I asked what specific meant. You will know, Shaw said. That is the whole problem with specific. I went to the analysis deck. I logged the pulses. They were all on time. The 8:17, the 8:58, the 9:40. All of them exactly at 2,469 seconds. And each time the waveform bloomed on the monitor, I felt my shoulders come down half a centimeter. And each time I hated myself a little for the relief. Owen noticed. Of course he noticed. He was the only person there who looked at people. You look like a man who has seen his own bank statement, he said. I flagged a deviation. It got explained away. Explained how? I told him about the preamplifier cabinet. Owen stopped eating. He put his fork down and looked at a point somewhere above my monitor and did the arithmetic, and I watched him get to the end of it. That is not a real explanation, he said. No. That is not even a good fake explanation. That is the kind of explanation you write when you know nobody is going to be allowed to check it. He picked the fork back up and did not eat anything with it. What did Brandt actually say? He said the interval has moved twice before. 1999 and 2019. Owen looked at me properly then. 2019, he said. You know something about 2019. I know that everyone who was here in 2019 is either gone or does not talk about it. I know that D-Wing had 11 more rooms than it does now. He shook his head. I got that from a maintenance schematic, not from a person. The current floor plan and the 2018 floor plan do not match, and there is no renovation order between them. Rooms do not disappear. No, Owen agreed. They do not. That night I took the sedative Shaw had given me. It put me under fast and held me down in a heavy, dreamless way that I had not experienced in years, and I woke at 4 in the morning with my heart pounding and no memory of anything, and an absolute certainty that something had been in the room. I lay still and listened. The ventilation, the distant hum of the pumps, the tick of the hull adjusting. And under all of it, at the very bottom of hearing, so faint that it might have been my own blood, a long, descending tone that took about 4 seconds to complete. I checked the clock beside my bed. 4:11:22 seconds. The nearest scheduled pulse was at 4:29. I lay in the unlit room, 400 meters under the ocean, and I listened to a sound that was not supposed to exist, and I understood with complete clarity that the 0.4 of a second had not been the beginning. It had been the end of something, the last steady beat before the change. I did not sleep again that night. There were 16 hydrophone channels feeding the analysis deck. 12 of them were arrayed around the containment well at even spacing. 2 were mounted in the well itself, close enough to the coil but the maintenance crews had to be tethered when they serviced them. One was an external hull unit that listened to the open ocean and existed mostly to give us a baseline of what nothing sounded like. And one was Channel 12. Channel 12 had never worked. It had been installed during the original build in the late 90s and had never once returned a usable signal. It was not dead in the ordinary sense. A dead channel gives you silence, a flat line, an honest absence. Channel 12 gave you noise, not the noise of a bad cable, which has a texture you learn to recognize, and not the noise of a failing preamplifier, which sounds like frying. It gave you a broadband hiss with a faint structure inside it, and every analyst who had ever been assigned to Harrow had spent a week of their first rotation convinced they could find a pattern in it. And every one of them had eventually written the same conclusion in the same words. No recoverable signal. Recommend decommission. The recommendation had been made 9 times in 26 years. It had never been approved. Channel 12 stayed in the rack, powered, recording, filling a terabyte of storage a week with nothing. I'd stopped listening to it in my 3rd year. I started again on the morning after the sound in my quarters. I came in early. The deck was empty except for the night analyst, a young woman named Petra, who acknowledged me with a nod and went back to her screen. I sat down, put on the headphones, and rotated Channel 12 to my monitor. The hiss came up. I listened to it for 11 minutes. I filtered it. I ran it through the whole toolkit: band splitting, spectral subtraction, adaptive noise cancellation, the correlation stack that I had written myself in year 4 and never published because there had been nothing to publish it about. At minute 12, I found the voice. I want to be careful here because I have had a long time to consider whether I found it or made it. Both are possible. A human being who works with noise for 11 years develops a hunger for structure, and the ear is an obliging organ. It will build you a cathedral out of static if you stare at the static long enough. But this was not that. I know the difference between a shape you assemble and a shape that is already assembled when you arrive. It was a single voice, male, slow, unhurried, speaking at conversational volume from somewhere far away, buried under a mountain of hiss and separated into fragments that arrived several seconds apart. The words were not clear. The cadence was. It was reciting something. It had the meter of a list. I stacked 40 minutes of Channel 12 and aligned the fragments and pulled the noise floor down as far as it would come. And when I played it back, the voice said 7 syllables, and then stopped, and then said 7 syllables again, and then stopped, and each group of 7 had the same rhythm, and I knew the rhythm. It was the rhythm of a name and a number. I sat in that chair with my hands flat on the desk and my heart going, and I thought about the last thing Brandt had said to me, and I thought about 11 rooms that were on a schematic and not in the building. Then I did something stupid. I pulled the staff roster for 2019 out of the archive. It came up without resistance, which surprised me, and it took me about 4 seconds to understand why. The roster was there. It listed 141 personnel, but every entry past the 90th had the same status code in the final column. Transferred, administrative, no forward record, 51 people. Transferred on the same date to nowhere. I copied 3 of the names onto the back of my hand with a pen because I did not trust anything with a screen in it. Then I closed the archive and went back to logging pulses, and at 8:17 and 41 seconds, the coil made its sound exactly on schedule, and my shoulders came down half a centimeter, and I hated it. Owen arrived at 7:50 with the coffee. I did not tell him about Channel 12. I have thought about that decision a great deal. I told him about the roster instead. He listened without expression, which was unusual for him. And when I finished, he said, "Show me your hand." I turned it over. He read the three names, and something moved in his face. "Ilsley," he said. "You know it. Peter Ilsley. He was an acoustic analyst." Owen looked up. "He had your job, Adrian. Before you." I have thought about that, too. 11 years I had held that chair and never once asked who had held it before me. There had been no handover. I had arrived, been shown to a station, been given a manual, and had begun. The manual had a name in the front cover, printed in the standard block letters of an official document, and the name was the manufacturer of the software. There had been no human name anywhere in that room. "How do you know that?" I said. "Because the structural database has authorship fields, and half the calibration files on this station were signed by P. Ilsley, and I asked about him in my first year, and I was told he transferred." Owen's mouth did something unpleasant. "Everybody transfers. Nobody arrives from anywhere." That was true. I turned it over and found it was completely true. In 11 years, I had watched people leave Harrow, and I had never in that time met a single person who had come to Harrow from another installation. Every arrival was a first assignment. Every departure was a transfer. There is a word for a system with entrances and no exits, and I did not want to think about it while I was 400 meters under the ocean. I worked the rest of my shift. At noon, I ate. At 1, I took my call, except that Nora did not answer, and the system logged it as a missed connection and offered to reschedule, and I sat in the booth for the full allotted 20 minutes anyway, because a booth is a private room, and Harrow did not have many of those. At 16:34, the interval broke again. This time it was early by 1.1 seconds. I logged it. I did not report it. There was nobody to report it to who had not already told me what the answer would be. Instead, I began to build a record of my own on paper in a notebook I kept in the inner pocket of my jumpsuit, and I wrote down every pulse arrival to the millisecond for the rest of the day. 22:13, early by 1.4 seconds. 22:54, early by 1.4 seconds. 23:35, early by 2.0 seconds. It was accelerating. If you have listened this far, I would like to know whether you have ever worked somewhere that ran on a rhythm, a machine or a shift or a house, and whether you noticed the day it changed before anyone else did. Put it in the comments. And if you want the rest of what happened at Harrow, the subscribe button is right there under this video, and I would take it as a kindness. I went back to my quarters at midnight and did not take the sedative. I lay on the bunk with the lights off and waited. And at 4:11 and 22 seconds, exactly as it had the night before, the sound came. It was a little louder. And this time, underneath it, threaded through it in a way that made my scalp tighten, there was something else. A second component, higher, shorter, 6 notes rising and then falling back. I knew it immediately, in the way you know a smell. It was a lullaby, a specific one. My wife had sung it to Nora when Nora was small and would not sleep, and after my wife died, I had sung it badly and off-key for 3 years. And when Nora turned 8, she told me to stop because she was not a baby, and I stopped, and I had not thought about it consciously in a decade. 6 notes, rising and falling back. The coil, 400 meters under the South Atlantic Ocean, 12,000 years old, was humming my daughter to sleep. I got up. I put on my jumpsuit over my bedclothes. I walked to the analysis deck in the middle of the night shift, and I sat down at my station, and I routed Channel 12 to my headphones, and this time, the voice under the hiss was not fragments. It was clear. It said, "Adrian Kohl, 11 years." It said, "Adrian Kohl, 11 years." It said it again and again, and it kept saying it, patient and unhurried, in a voice that I did not recognize, but that had the specific flatness of a person reading a name off a list. I pulled the headphones off. The deck was quiet. Petra was at her station on the far side of the ring with her back to me. I put the headphones back on. Adrian Kohl. 11 years. Then the voice stopped, and there was a gap of perhaps 3 seconds. And in that gap, I heard a different sound entirely. Closer, without hiss. Absolutely clean, as though the microphone that recorded it had been in a quiet room. It was a woman clearing her throat. I sat there. I did not move. There was no woman in the containment well. There was no microphone in a quiet room. There were 16 hydrophones, and every one of them was in the ocean. And then on Channel 12, on a deadline that had produced nothing but noise for 26 years, somebody wrote across my monitor in the plain white system font that the analysis software used for status messages. It said, "Do not answer it." The message held for 4 seconds and cleared itself, and the waveform display came back, and the hiss went on. I sat in that chair until the daylight in the ceiling did not change and the morning shift began to arrive. A sound is only a signal when somebody decides to answer it. That was a sentence I had used for years in briefings, in the training material I had written for new analysts, in conversations at meals. I had meant it as a caution against overreading. Noise is not a message until you make it one. I had said it perhaps 500 times. It had never once occurred to me to wonder what happens to the thing that has been sending for 12,000 years without a single reply. The morning after, I went looking for Peter Ilsley. Harrow Station kept paper. This surprises people. A facility built on that budget with that level of instrumentation, and yet somewhere on the third ring there was a records office with steel cabinets in it. Because a certain generation of security thinking holds that a document which has never been digitized cannot be exfiltrated by networks. The records office was staffed by a man named Orrell, who had been there longer than anyone and who had a system that only he understood. He was pleasant, incurious, and entirely willing to let me look at maintenance logs, which were not classified, and which I told him I needed for a calibration history. I asked for the hydrophone service records covering 1998 to 2020. He brought me 9 binders. I sat at a metal table under a fluorescent tube and went through them. Ilsley was everywhere. His signature was on hundreds of pages, a fast, cramped hand that leaned hard to the right. He had serviced the array, calibrated the preamplifiers, signed off on cable replacements. He had been meticulous. He had also, I noticed by the third binder, developed a habit that no other technician on the station shared. He wrote in the margins, not complaints, not doodles, short observations, always in the same cramped hand, always dated. Beside a routine calibration in 2014, CH12 noise floor down 3 decibels since January. Nobody has ever measured this trend. It should not have a trend. Beside a cable replacement in 2016. Asked MS about the 99 event. She did not deny it. That is not the same as confirming it. MS. I sat with that for a while and thought about the staff of Harrow Station and came up with exactly one person. Margaret Selwyn. She was the longest-serving researcher on the station, 31 years, a structural specialist who worked alone in a laboratory on the second ring and appeared at briefings roughly 1 week in 4. She was in her 70s. She was, as far as I knew, the only person at Harrow who had been present when the coil was brought aboard. I kept reading. 2017. Interval variance, 0 to 9 significant figures. 9. There is no natural process that does this. Something is holding it. 2018. If it is being held, then the question is not what it is. The question is, what happens when whatever is holding it lets go? And then, on a page dated the 4th of March, 2019, in the margin beside a routine entry about a hydrophone mount, in that same cramped right-leaning hand, interval moved, 0.4 seconds early. Reported. Told it was thermal. I read that line 11 times. 4/10 of a second. Reported. Told it was thermal. The same number. The same explanation. 5 years and 4 months before it happened to me. I turned the page. The next entry was dated the 5th of March, and it was not in Ilsley's hand at all. It was in mine. I want to be extremely clear about what I am describing, because this is the point in the account where people stop believing me, and I understand why. The entry was written in my handwriting, not similar to my handwriting, mine. I have an unusual way of forming a lowercase g, which my mother used to correct and which I never fixed, a closed loop that sits high and left of the stem. It was there. My capital A, which I make in 2 strokes instead of 3. The way I cross a T too far to the right. The entry read, "He will tell you it was thermal. It was not thermal. You have between 9 and 11 days, depending on which one of us you are. The supply drop is on the 2nd Friday. Do not use the northern lock. It is watched. D9. The number is under the bed. Do not answer it. Whatever it offers you, it is not offering it to you. A K. I sat in the records office with the binder open in front of me and my hands flat on the table on either side of it. And Orel hummed to himself at his desk 20 feet away, and the fluorescent tube ticked. Then I looked at the date on the entry again. The 5th of March, 2019. 11 years ago, I had been in a training facility in a landlocked country, filling in forms, being told about the strain that long assignment isolation places on personal relationships. I had never been to Harrow in 2019. I had been at Harrow in 2019. Because I had been there since 2015, and I had spent the 5th of March of that year at my station logging pulses, and I could prove it. Because Harrow logged everything. Both of those sentences felt true. I want to record that because it was the first time it happened, and it happened many more times afterward, and it is the single most frightening symptom of what was occurring at that station. Not the voices, not the doubles. This, 2 memories arriving with equal weight and equal texture, and no way to choose between them. I took a photograph of the page with my terminal, which was against regulation, and then I thought better of it, and deleted the photograph and copied the words onto the back page of my paper notebook instead. Then I put the binders back in order and thanked Orel and asked him one question on the way out. Do people ever come in here and write in these? Orel looked up. He was perhaps 60, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Nobody comes in here at all, he said. You are the 3rd person this year. Who were the other 2? He checked his sign and sheet, which was a paper sheet on a clipboard, because of course it was. Selwyn in February. He ran his finger down. And you. I have never been in here before. Orel turned the clipboard around. There was my name in my handwriting, dated the 11th of January, 6 months earlier. I walked out of the records office and down the corridor of the 3rd ring, and I got about 40 meters before my legs decided to stop. And I put my back against the bulkhead and slid down it and sat on the floor with my forearms on my knees. That is where I was when I saw my daughter. She was at the far end of the corridor, perhaps 50 meters away, where it curved out of sight. She was wearing a green coat I had never seen. Her hair was longer than it had been on the screen 4 days earlier. She was standing still, and she was looking at me, and her face had on it an expression I had seen exactly once before. At her mother's funeral, when she was 11 years old and had turned around in the front pew looking for me and could not find me because I had gone outside. Nora, I said. My voice did not work properly. I said it again and got up. She did not move. She watched me come. When I had covered perhaps half the distance, she raised one hand, not a wave, a stopping gesture, palm out, and she shook her head very slightly. Then 2 security officers came around the curve behind her. They took her arms, one on each side without violence, the way you would guide someone who had become confused. She did not resist. She looked back over her shoulder at me for 2 full seconds while they walked her out of sight. I ran. I reached the curve in about 8 seconds. The corridor beyond it was empty. 40 meters of gray bulkhead, enclosed hatches, and a service ladder, and nobody at all. There is no door in that stretch. I know because I checked every one of them, and the 2 that opened were a wiring closet and a lavatory, and both were empty. I went to security. Chief Inez Duarte was a small, extremely calm woman who had run Harrow Security for 6 years and who had never, in my experience, raised her voice at anyone. She listened to me without interrupting for 4 minutes. Then she pulled the corridor footage. We watched it together on the wall screen in her office. The footage showed the 3rd ring corridor. At 14:12, I entered frame from the records office and walked 40 meters and sat down on the floor. I sat there for 1 minute and 9 seconds. Then I stood up and said something to the empty corridor. Then I walked and then ran to the curve and out of frame. There was no one else in the corridor at any point. "Play it again," I said. She played it again. "There are cameras past the curve?" "There are." She brought them up. 3 angles covering the entire section. In all 3, the corridor was empty from 1350 until 1419, when I appeared in it, opening hatches. I sat down in the chair opposite her desk. "Mr. Kohl," Duarte said, "how much have you slept this week?" "Enough. That is not a number. Inez, my daughter is 19 years old and lives 4,000 miles from here and cannot swim well. She is not in this building. I know that. I am not asking you to believe she was here." I made myself say it slowly. "I am asking you what it means that I saw 2 of your officers on this station handling a person who does not exist." Duarte was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Which officers?" "I did not see their faces. Standard uniform. One tall, one about my height." She turned to her console and worked at it for a while, and I watched her face, and I saw the exact moment when something in the data did not agree with her. "What?" I said. "Nothing." "Chief." Duarte closed the window she was looking at, which is a thing people do when they want a conversation to end, and she looked at me with an expression I could not read. "At 1413, she said, the internal positioning system recorded 2 personnel transponders in that corridor, Officers Hale and Vasquez. Both of them are logged as being in the North Lock at the time, which is 400 meters away, and both of them have told me they were in the North Lock, and the North Lock camera confirms they were in the North Lock. Then the positioning system is wrong." "The positioning system has never been wrong." Duarte stood up. "It has been wrong twice this month, both times in that corridor. I filed both reports. Neither of them has been actioned." She walked me to the door. "Go and sleep," she said. "And Mr. Kohl, if the system logs you somewhere you are not, I would appreciate hearing about it from you before I hear about it from the log." I said I would. I went back toward D-Wing, and on the way I did something I had not planned. I did not go to my own quarters. I went to find room D9. D-Wing held 48 rooms on 2 levels, and every one of them was identical, 2 meters by 3. A bunk, a desk, a locker, a basin. Mine was D22. I had lived in it for 11 years and had never once put anything on the walls. The 9 was on the lower level at the end of the corridor, and it was the last room before the wing terminated in a sealed pressure hatch. It was listed as unassigned. That in itself was not strange. Harrow ran at about 70% of design capacity, and there were empty rooms scattered through both wings. What was strange was that D9 was not merely unassigned. When I pulled the accommodation register on a wall terminal, D9 did not appear in it at all. The list went from D8 to D10. I stood in the corridor and counted doors. There were 9 doors between the stairwell and the pressure hatch. The 9th one had a number plate on it, and the number plate said D9, and the register said that door did not exist. The lock was a mechanical override type, the old kind, installed during the original build and never upgraded because upgrading a lock on a room nobody used was nobody's priority. I had a maintenance card that opened mechanical overrides in D-Wing because every analyst did, because the hot water failures meant we were constantly getting into service panels ourselves. I checked the corridor. I swiped the card. The bolt drew back with a heavy sound that seemed enormous. The room smelled of nothing at all, which was the first thing I noticed. Rooms that have been sealed a long time develop a smell. This one had the flat scrubbed neutrality of the ventilation system, and nothing else, as though the air had been exchanged continuously for years in a room nobody entered. It was furnished. Bunk, desk, locker, basin. The bedding was made tightly, with the corners squared in the way people learn in institutions. There was a plastic cup on the basin shelf. The locker was empty and open. I closed the door behind me and stood in the middle of the room and let my eyes adjust to the low emergency lighting because I did not want to turn on the main light in a room that was supposed to be empty. The number is under the bed. I got down on the floor. The underside of a Harrow bunk is a steel frame with a mesh panel and a storage void beneath. The void was empty. I ran my hands along the frame, the mesh, the wall behind, and found nothing. And I was about to get up when my fingers passed over the underside of the mattress support and caught on something raised. It was scratched into the steel, deep, done over many sittings, the way a person scratches something when they have a great deal of time and one tool. I could not see it from that angle. I felt it out, letter by letter, with my fingertips like a man reading a wall in the black. And then I got up and wrote in my notebook what my fingers had told me. 6 digits, 220481. Under the digits, in smaller strokes, 4 words, not the object, the room. I sat on the floor of D9 with my back against the locker and looked at the 6 digits in my notebook. Then I looked up. The ceiling of a Harrow room is a grid of acoustic panels, standard, removable, with a maintenance void above them containing cable runs and ducting. Every room has them. Nobody ever looks at them. One of the panels in D9, the one directly above the bunk, was seated slightly wrong, perhaps 3 millimeters proud of the others. The kind of thing you would never notice unless you were lying on that bunk, staring at that ceiling for months. I stood on the bunk and pushed it. It lifted. Above it was the void, 1/2 meter of space crossed by conduit, and resting on the ducting, wrapped in a torn section of jumpsuit fabric, was a bound logbook. I took it. I put the panel back. I made the bed the way I had found it, because it seemed important to leave the room the way it had been. And then I went out into the corridor and closed the door behind me and heard the bolt engage, and I walked back to D22 with a stolen book inside my jumpsuit and my heart going like a bird in a box. Peter Ilsley had written in it for 4 years. The early entries were technical and dry, a personal working record of the kind a careful analyst keeps, because the official system does not have a field for doubt. He tracked the Channel 12 noise floor. He tracked the interval to a precision the official logs did not require. He noted once that he had been reprimanded for requesting archive access outside his clearance. Around the 3rd year, the tone changed. I am going to set down here what I have actually observed and not what I have been told, because I have noticed that after a briefing I remember the briefing and not the observation, and that is a thing worth being afraid of. Observation 1. The interval is not natural. Nothing in nature holds a period to 9 significant figures for 26 years. Machines do not do this. Pulsars do not do this. The interval is being maintained. Observation 2. If it is maintained, there is a mechanism, and the mechanism is not visible in the object. We have mapped that object to the atomic level. There is no clock in it. Observation 3. Therefore, the clock is somewhere else, and the object is the bell, not the hand that swings it. Then a page later. MS told me today that I am the 4th person to arrive at that conclusion in 30 years, and that all 3 of the others transferred. She said it in a way that made me think she was warning me and not threatening me. Then she said something I have been unable to stop thinking about. She said, the question everyone asks is what it is saying. Nobody has ever asked what it is counting. Counting? I put the book down at that point and sat with my hands over my face for a while. Because I had spent 11 years writing down 140,000 arrivals of a periodic signal, and had described it to myself without exception as a pulse, a beat, a tone, a transmission, and never once as a count. If you count for 12,000 years, you are counting toward something. The later entries were harder to read, and not only because the handwriting deteriorated. 2018 November. The whispers began 4 days ago. It is not on Channel 12. It is not on any channel. I hear it in my quarters at 0411. Always 0411. There is no pulse scheduled at 0411 on any day of the cycle. I have checked this against the full 26-year record. 0411 is a time that has never had a pulse in it. 2019, January. Saw myself in the transit lift. Not a reflection. He was going down while I was coming up, and the lifts are glass on the shaft side, and we passed each other, and he turned his head and looked at me. He looked tired. He had a healing cut on his left cheek. I have no cut on my left cheek. 2019, February. There are more of us than there are of them. That is the thing nobody understands. When I say I saw myself, everyone hears a hallucination, a stress symptom, a man breaking down under isolation. But a hallucination is a thing your mind makes. It does not have a healing cut on its cheek that you have never had. It does not walk with a limp you have not acquired yet. 2019, February later. I have worked out what I think is happening, and I'm going to write it down badly because I do not have the vocabulary. The object is not a transmitter. It is a lock. What is on the other side of it wants it open. It cannot open it from that side. It has to be opened from here, by a person, freely. And it has spent 12,000 years counting because it is waiting for a person who will do it. But it cannot know in advance which person. So it runs them. All of them, every version. It puts a version of a candidate into a version of this station, and it watches what he does, and when that version fails, it discards him and runs the next one. And it does this until it finds the one who says yes. That is what the whispers are. That is what the doubles are. They are not ghosts. They are the other attempts leaking. 2019, March 4th, interval moved 0.4 seconds early. Reported. Told it was thermal. It has begun. If Selwyn is right about the 2 previous events, I have somewhere between 9 and 11 days. 2019, March 7. I have found the schedule. Supply drop is second Friday, 2200 to 2300, and the loading bay is the only place on the station with an unmonitored external connection. because the crane operators complained about the cameras and the complaint was upheld, which is the single stupidest thing I have ever been grateful for. 2019, March 9th. Selwyn gave me her paper. I understand now why it was buried. I am leaving the access number where the next one will find it, if the next one is the kind of person who looks under a bed. I hope he is not. I hope nobody ever reads this. If you are reading this, they will offer you something. It will be the exact thing, not a thing like it. The exact thing you have wanted for years and have stopped letting yourself want out loud. That is how you will know it is not a gift. Do not answer it. That was the final entry. I looked at the date, the 9th of March, 2019. The second Friday of March 2019 was the 8th, the day before. So either Ilsley had missed his own escape window, or he had written that entry after choosing not to take it, or the date was wrong, or something had happened to the days. I went to my terminal and pulled the station incident summary for March 2019, expecting nothing. There was one entry. It was 2 lines long. March 11th, 2019. Full power interruption. Duration, 6 hours, 12 minutes. Cause undetermined. Personnel reassignment following review 51. 51 people. Transferred, administrative, no forward record. 2 days after Peter Ilsley wrote that he had somewhere between 9 and 11 days. I checked the calendar on my terminal. The next supply drop was the second Friday of the month. It was 9 days away. I did not sleep that night either, but for the first time in a week. That was a decision rather than a failure. I spent it working. I built a private log. Not on the station system. On paper and on a spare data card I kept physically in my boot because I had begun to develop the specific paranoia that Harrow seemed to cultivate in people, and because Ilsley's book had made a strong case for writing things down where they could not be edited. I logged the interval. By the morning, it was arriving 6 seconds early. By that evening, 11. I logged the whispers. They came at 4:11 and 22 seconds without fail, and each night they were louder, and each night the lullaby underneath was more clearly the lullaby and less clearly something that only sounded like it. I logged my own movements to the minute so that I would have something to check against. That last one is what caught it. On the 4th day, I pulled a station positioning log for my own transponder, which any employee is entitled to do, and I laid it beside my paper record. They matched for the whole day except for one span of 22 minutes, from 11:40 to 12:02, during which my paper record said I was at my station on the analysis deck, and the positioning log said I was in the archive on the 4th ring. I checked the archive access records. At 11:46, my credentials had been used to open the sealed research index. Retinal confirmed. Voice confirmed, 2-factor confirmed. 12 minutes of access. 4 documents open. At 11:46, according to my own paper log and the analysis deck camera, and Owen Price sitting 2 meters away from me, I was logging the 11:41 pulse. I pulled the archive camera. I want to describe what I saw carefully. The camera in the 4th ring archive is a fixed overhead unit with a wide lens, low resolution, 30 frames a second. The footage showed a man in a Harrow jumpsuit enter the archive at 11:45, cross to a terminal, sit down, and work for 12 minutes. He did not look up at the camera. His posture was mine. The way he sat forward with his left elbow on the desk and his right hand doing all the work was mine. He wore reading glasses. At minute 11, he took the glasses off and rubbed his eyes, and for about a second and a half, his face was toward the lens. It was my face. I froze it. I zoomed until the pixels broke down. And then I saw the thing that has stayed with me more than the face did. The left lens of his glasses had a crack in it. A hairline fracture running from the lower rim up and to the right, About a third of the way across. I took off my own glasses and looked at them. My left lens had a crack in it. Lower rim, up and to the right, about a third of the way across. It had happened 8 days earlier when I dropped them getting out of the transit lift. I had submitted a replacement request and been told the next optical order would ship with the supply drop. And that would have been the end of it. One more impossible thing on a growing list. Except that I remembered something and my stomach turned over. I went back to the footage and stepped it frame by frame. The crack in his lens ran from the lower rim up and to the left. Mirrored. I sat very still. There is an obvious explanation for a mirrored image, and it is that somebody flipped the footage. But if you flip footage, the text flips with it, and there was text in the frame. The terminal header and the room designation stenciled on the wall, and both of them read correctly. The footage was not flipped. He was. I went to find Owen. He was in the structural bay on the second ring, alone, running an ultrasound sweep on a sample cradle. When I came in, he did not turn around. "Owen, I know what you are going to ask me," he said. "You do not. You are going to ask me whether I saw you leave the deck this morning." I stopped. "Because you did leave the deck this morning," Owen said. He shut the sweep down and turned around, and his face was gray. "At 11:40, you said you were going to the lavatory. You came back at 12:03. I made a joke about it. You did not laugh, which I noticed because you always laugh at that joke. I did not leave the deck, Adrian. I logged the 11:41 pulse. It is in the system with my keystroke signature." I watched you walk out. We looked at each other across the structural bay. Then Owen said quietly, "Which of us is wrong?" I did not have an answer. I still do not entirely. But I said the only true thing available. "Maybe neither," I told him then. "All of it. Channel 12. The voice reading my name and my years of service. The roster with 51 blanks. Ilsley's logbook, which I had in my jumpsuit and which I put on the bench between us. The handwriting in the maintenance binder. Nora in the corridor and the positioning system, putting 2 officers where they were not. The man in the archive with my face and my glasses, and the crack running the wrong way. Owen read the logbook for 40 minutes without speaking. He had a way of reading where his lips moved slightly on the hard parts. When he finished, he closed it and put both hands flat on the cover. "The interval is at 11 seconds early," he said. 14, as of an hour ago. "Do you know what that means for the structural team?" "Nothing. We were not told. There has been no announcement. The interval is the single most important measurement on this station, and it has moved by 14 seconds, and there has been no announcement." He laughed, and it was not a good laugh. "Brandt gave the same briefing this morning he gives every morning, unchanged, stable, standard day. He knows. Of course he knows." Owen stood up and walked to the far wall and stood with his back to me. "Adrian, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be angry with me." "Go on." 3 days ago, Duarte asked me to keep an informal watch on you. She was decent about it. She said you had reported an incident and that the medical officer had concerns and that, as your closest colleague, I might notice things earlier than a camera would. He turned around. I said yes. I said yes because I thought I was helping you. I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I was not angry. "You were helping me," I said. "Are you going to tell her about this?" Owen looked at the logbook for a long moment. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because 2 weeks ago the coffee dispenser on the analysis deck broke, and I put in a repair request, and the system told me the request had already been submitted." He said it flatly. "By me. 4 hours earlier, and I had not submitted it. And I told myself I had forgotten, because that is what you tell yourself. And I have been telling myself that for 2 weeks, and I am very tired of it. That is how I gained an ally, and I want to record it honestly. Because the version of this story where I was clever and courageous is not the true one. I did not persuade Owen Price. He had already been standing at the edge of the same hole, alone, doing what everyone at Harrow did, which was to assume that the thing wrong with the station was the thing wrong with himself. We agreed on 3 things that afternoon. First, that we would work from paper and from the card in my boot, and that we would assume anything on the station network was visible. Second, that we would find Margaret Selwyn. Third, that we had 9 days and probably fewer because Ilsley had estimated 9 to 11 from a 4/10 of a second deviation, and I was already at 14 seconds and rising. I went back to my quarters at 2300. I did not take the sedative. I lay on the bunk in the low emergency light and waited for 411, and I thought about the man in the archive. He had opened 4 documents. The access record listed them by index number, not title, and 3 of the numbers resolved to unremarkable structural surveys. The 4th resolved to nothing. The index number returned a record that had been removed, with a stub entry that gave only an author and a date. Author M. Selwyn. Date June 4th, 1999. 1999. The first time the interval had moved. At 4:11 and 22 seconds the sound came, and it was loud enough now that I felt it in the frame of the bunk, and the 6 notes of the lullaby rose and fell inside it, as clearly as if somebody were humming them in the corridor outside my door. And then, for the first time, something new. A knock. 3 knocks on the door of D-22, unhurried, at 4:11 in the morning, 400 meters under the South Atlantic Ocean. I did not move. I lay in the bunk with my eyes open and my hands flat on the blanket, and I did not move at all. The knock came again. 3. Then a voice said through the door, in my own voice, exactly my voice, with a tiredness in it that mine did not have yet. Adrian, it is going to say it is me. When it does, do not open the door. And then nothing. I got up and opened the door. The corridor was empty in both directions for its whole length. On the floor outside my door, folded once, it was a page torn from a maintenance binder. I picked it up and closed the door and turned it over. It was the page from March the 5th, 2019, the one written in my handwriting. It had been torn out of a binder that was locked in a records office on the 3rd ring behind a door that required a key that Aurel kept on his belt. At the bottom, below the entry I had already read, 3 new lines had been added in the same hand. My hand. The ink was still slightly wet and came off on my thumb. They are running out of versions of you. That is why it is speeding up. But please be one of the ones who says no. The layout of Harrow Station was simple, and I could have drawn it from memory with my eyes closed, because for 11 years I had walked the same 4 routes and no others. 5 concentric rings on 3 levels, connected by 6 radial corridors and 4 stairwells, with the transit lift running up the central axis and the containment well at the bottom of everything. It was a wheel. If you were ever confused, you walked outward until you hit the outer ring, and then you followed it until you found a radial, and every radial was numbered on the deck plate. That was the design. On the 6th day, it stopped applying. It began with distances. I left the analysis deck at 1800 to go to the common room, a walk of about 110 meters that took me a little under 2 minutes, and that I had made roughly 4,000 times. That evening it took 9 minutes. I did not get lost. I made no wrong turns. The corridor was the correct corridor, with the correct hatches in the correct order, and it was simply longer. I passed the fire suppression cabinet that sits at the halfway point, and then I walked for another 6 minutes, and then I passed the fire suppression cabinet again. There is 1 fire suppression cabinet in that corridor. I checked the plan afterward. 1. I ate. I said nothing to anyone. Then I went to find Margaret Selwyn. Her laboratory was on the second ring, Radio 4, and it took me 40 minutes to fail to reach it. I walked Radio 4 from the outer ring inward and came out on the third level, which is not possible, because Radio 4 does not connect to the third level. I walked it again and arrived at the transit lift, which is at the center, which meant I had walked past 2 rings without noticing them. I took a stairwell down and came out in a section of the outer ring that had no deck plate numbers at all, just bare corridor and hatches with no designations. And I stood there in a part of Harrow Station that I had never seen in 11 years and listened to my own breathing. At the end of that corridor, there was a door with tape across it. Old tape, yellowed, the kind used to mark a work area, applied in a cross and never removed. There was a handwritten note taped beside it that had faded almost to nothing. I could read 3 words. Do not reopen. I did not open it. I want to be clear that this was not courage. I stood in front of that door for perhaps 30 seconds, and then I turned around and walked away very quickly, and I have thought about it every day since. I found my way back by accident, and then 20 minutes later, I found Margaret Selwyn, because she found me. I came around a curve on the second ring, and she was sitting on a bench outside a hatch, an old woman in a Harrow jumpsuit with her hands in her lap, and she was clearly waiting, and she had clearly been waiting for some time. "Mr. Kohl," she said, "you are late. I allowed you 50 minutes. It took you 70. You knew I was coming. I knew somebody was coming. It is always somebody, and it is usually the acoustic analyst, because you people are the only ones who actually listen." She stood up slowly, with the care of a person managing a bad hip. "Walk with me. Stay on my left and do not go through any door before I do." We walked. It took 3 minutes to reach her laboratory along a route that I would have sworn was not there. "How do you do that?" I said. "No, I do not do anything. I have simply been here since before it started, and it does not bother with me." She keyed the hatch. "It is not interested in old women. It never has been." Her laboratory was the least Harrow-like room I ever saw on that station. There were books in it, actual paper books on actual shelves, and a kettle, and a chair that had been brought from somewhere that made chairs for comfort. She sat down in it and pointed me at a stool. "Show me the book," she said. "Which book?" "Ilsley's. You have it in your jumpsuit. It has been making a corner since you came around the curve." She held out her hand. I gave it to her. She turned it over once without opening it and set it on the table beside her, and something happened in her face that she did not permit to stay there. "Well," she said, "he did leave it under the bed. I told him not to. You told him to leave it. I told him to leave the number. The number is useful. The book is a confession, and confessions get people killed." She looked up. "How far is the interval?" 22 seconds early, as of this afternoon. "Doubling." "Not exactly. Accelerating faster than doubling." Selwyn nodded slowly. 1999, it was linear for 6 days, and then it went over. 2019, it was linear for 4. This one has been steep from the beginning. She looked at the ceiling. "It has less patience than it used to." "Miss Selwyn." "Margaret?" "Margaret, I would like you to tell me what is happening on this station, and I would like you to do it without protecting me, because 2 nights ago somebody with my voice knocked on my door and told me not to open it, and I opened it." Selwyn was quiet for long enough that the kettle became audible. Then she said, "What do you think the object is?" "Ilsley thought it was a lock." "Ilsley was close, and being close is worse than being wrong, because it stops you looking." She leaned forward. "Mr. Kohl, In 1999, I proposed something, and it was buried, and I have had 27 years to be either right or mad about it, and I would like to tell you what I proposed while there is still someone on this station who will listen. Go on. The object is not a lock. It is not a transmitter. It is not a beacon. It is not a weapon. And it is not, whatever the recruitment material implied to you, a piece of technology from anywhere. Those are all ideas that assume it is a thing that exists in a place and does something. Then what is it? It is a question, Selwyn said. That has been asked out loud once every 41 minutes and 9 seconds for 12,000 years into an empty ocean by something that is prepared to wait. I sat on the stool in her laboratory and did not say anything. Everything else follows from that, she said. The interval does not vary because a question does not vary. The object does not cast a shadow because it is not, in the sense you mean, present. It is the audible portion of something whose body is elsewhere, in the same way that a bell rope in a tower is the portion of the bell that you can reach. And the whispers, those are the previous askings. They do not decay. 12,000 years of the same question, layered, and if you listen long enough, you begin to be able to separate the layers, which is a thing you should stop doing immediately, and will not. And the doubles. Selwyn got up and went to a shelf and took down a folder, and she held it against her chest for a moment before she gave it to me. That, she said, is the part they buried. I opened the folder. It was a research paper, 41 pages, typed on a machine that had a broken lowercase e, dated the 4th of June, 1999, with a title that had been struck through in pen and rewritten by hand. The typed title was Periodic Acoustic Emission from Artifact 6, a Structural Hypothesis. The handwritten title was The Rehearsal. Take it to your quarters, Selwyn said. Read it tonight. Do not read it here, because I do not want to watch you get to page 19. She sat back down and closed her eyes. And Mr. Kohl, 2 things before you go. Yes. The number under the bed is a protocol version, 2.20.481. It was the manual command standard used on this station until 2004. Every emitter in the containment well still accepts it, because the retrofit only changed the interface and nobody rewrites the low-level firmware on a system that works. If you ever need to speak to the well directly, and not through the modern software that Director Brandt can read over your shoulder, that is how you do it. And the second thing, Selwyn opened her eyes. When it makes you an offer, she said, it will not lie to you. Everyone expects a lie. There is no lie. It will offer you exactly what it says it is offering, and it will deliver exactly that, and that is the entire trap, because a thing that never lies is very difficult to say no to. She looked at her hands. It offered me a paper in 1999. It offered me that this work would be read, that my name would be on it, that I would not spend the last 30 years of my life in a room under the ocean, being politely ignored by men with better funding. What did you say? I said no, Margaret Selwyn said. And it kept its word about that, too. Nobody has ever read it. I read the paper that night in D-22 with the door locked and the emergency lighting on, sitting on the floor with my back to the bunk so that I could see the door. The first 18 pages were exactly what the typed title said. Instrumentation, methodology, 26 years of interval data reduced to a single table that occupied 4 pages and had no variance in it. It was careful work. It was the work of a person who had wanted very badly to be taken seriously and had understood that being taken seriously meant arriving at the frightening part by an unarguable road. Page 19 was where the road ended. Selwyn had written it plainly, and I am going to set down her own words here because I have the folder and because, after everything, somebody should have read them. The emission has been treated throughout this program as an output. I propose that it is an input, and that the receiving apparatus is not instrumentation, but personnel. Consider the following. In 26 years of continuous operation, the emission has not varied. In that same period, personnel psychological screening at this installation has recorded a rate of perceptual disturbance approximately 11 times the rate recorded at comparable isolated postings. The disturbances are not random. They cluster into 4 categories with remarkable consistency across unconnected individuals. 1. Auditory phenomena occurring at 0411 station time, a time at which no emission is scheduled and at which none has ever been recorded. 2. Encounters with persons known to the subject who are not present at the installation. 3. Encounters with the subject himself, frequently exhibiting minor physical differences. 4. Alterations in the perceived geometry of the installation. I have found no organic mechanism which accounts for these 4 categories occurring together. I propose instead that they are not symptoms. They are contamination. She went on for 11 pages, and she built it the way she built everything, 1 plank at a time. Her proposal was this. The object, whatever it was, existed at a point where more than one version of events was available at once. She would not use the words other worlds, and she was scrupulous about not using them, because she said the words carried furniture with them that she had no evidence for. She used the word attempt. The object was running attempts. Each attempt was a complete version of Harrow Station, with a complete staff, going about a complete and consistent set of days. In each attempt, the object asked its question. In each attempt, it observed the answer. And when an attempt produced an answer it did not want, the attempt was ended and another was begun. The attempts were not sequential. That was the part that had taken me 3 readings to hold in my head. They were concurrent, all of them running at once, layered, and the layers were not perfectly separated, and the imperfection in the separation was what we had been calling perceptual disturbance for 26 years. The whispers were the other attempts talking. The doubles were the other candidates walking. The corridors changed length because 2 versions of the same corridor were briefly the same corridor, and 0411 was not a time at which nothing happened. It was a time at which nothing happened here. I put the paper down at that point and went and stood at the basin and ran the cold water over my wrists for a while, which is a thing my wife taught me for panic, and which has never once worked. Page 31 had the conclusion. If the above is correct, then the 26-year stability of the emission interval is the most significant datum in the record, and it has been misread. A perfectly stable interval does not indicate a process at equilibrium. It indicates a process which has not yet begun. The emission is not the event. The emission is the metronome preceding the event. I would therefore predict that a variation in the interval, of any magnitude, in either direction, constitutes the single most serious observable at this installation, and that any explanation offered for such a variation, which does not treat it as an emergency, should itself be treated as evidence that the emergency is already in progress. Recommend immediate development of a shutdown methodology. Recommend no personnel to serve consecutive rotations exceeding 4 months. Recommend full disclosure to all personnel of the 1999 event. The paper had been submitted on the 4th of June, 1999. Stapled to the back was a single page, a response, dated 11 days later, unsigned, on letterhead with the crest removed. Reviewed, findings unsupported. Author to be retained, distribution withdrawn, Index entry removed. Recommend author remain at installation. Recommend author remain at installation. They had read it, understood it, believed it enough to erase it, and then kept her down there for 27 more years, because a person who knows is easier to manage at the bottom of the ocean than on a continent. I did not sleep. At 4:11 and 22 seconds, the sound came and the lullaby came with it, and this time there were words in it. Not words I could make out. Words with edges, the shape of a sentence delivered gently by a person leaning over a bed. I went to see Brandt at 6. He was already at his desk. I do not think he had been to bed. There was a bottle in the room, not out, but not put away carefully enough either, and his eyes had the particular quality of a man who has been reading the same page for a long time. I put Selwyn's folder on his desk. He looked at it and did not touch it. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Does it matter?" "No." He rubbed his face with both hands. "No, it does not. Sit down, Adrian." I sat down. 20 seconds, he said. 31 as of the 4:29 pulse. 36 as of the 5:10. He turned his monitor toward me, and there it was, the deviation curve, plotted properly with a fitted exponential and a projection, and the projection crossed zero interval in 6 days. You understand what zero means. It means the question stops being asked. Brandt looked at me sharply. Whatever he had expected me to say, it had not been that. "You have read it," he said. "I have read it." "Then you are ahead of every other person on this station, except Selwyn, and behind me by about 9 years. He turned the monitor back. "I read that paper in my first month. It is the reason I took the posting. I was going to be the director who developed the shutdown methodology. I had a plan and a timetable, and I requested a budget line." "What happened?" "It was declined." He said it without heat, which was worse. "Not refused. Declined with a note thanking me for my diligence and a reminder that the installation's function is observation and containment, and that any proposal involving deliberate interference with the artifact would require approval at a level that does not exist in writing." He gave me a small, terrible smile. "Do you know what that means, Adrian? It means there is no level. It means the answer is no, and there is nobody to appeal to, because the people who would have to approve it have arranged not to be identifiable. So you gave briefings." "So I gave briefings. Standard, stable, unchanged. For 9 years." He picked up his tablet and put it down again. "In 2019, I watched 51 people stop existing over the course of about 6 hours, and then I wrote a report saying they had been reassigned, and I have never once been asked about it." "Stop existing? That is the accurate phrase, and I am too tired to soften it." Brandt looked at the window and the green cone of floodlight and the slow, endless snow falling through it. "There was a power interruption. 6 hours and 12 minutes. When the lights came back, there were 90 of us instead of 141, and every single person on this station remembered it as normal. Rosters had adjusted. Duty schedules had adjusted. Rooms that had been occupied were storage. There were 11 rooms in D-Wing that had been there in the morning and were not there in the evening, and the schematic in my office had changed, Adrian. I was looking at it when it changed, and I did not see it change. I simply looked away and looked back, and it had always been that way." He stopped. "And I remembered," he said. "That is the part. 51 people were taken out of the world, and I was the only one who noticed. And I have spent 7 years wondering why, and the only answer I have is that whoever runs the attempt needs one person in the room who understands what he is looking at. It is not a mercy. It is an audience." I said, "Ilsley remembered too." "Peter Ilsley," Brandt said, "was the one that was running." The word sat in the room. And now, I said, and now it is running you. He met my eyes for the first time in the conversation. You are 11 years in. He was 11 years in. Selwyn was 11 years in 1999, and she said no, and the attempt was discarded, and it started again. It picks the same profile every time. Long service, technically capable, isolated and carrying something it can offer back. I thought of the missed call, of a girl in a room with posters I did not recognize saying she had stopped expecting things because it was easier. What does it want? I said. Selwyn thinks it wants to be answered. I think that is the same thing as wanting to be let in, and I think the distinction is academic. Brant stood up. Adrian, I am going to do the only useful thing I have done in 9 years, and then I am going to go back to my desk and give the briefing at 8. The supply tender arrives on Friday, 2200, 90 personnel. It has capacity for 60 on the emergency manifest. You are going to evacuate. I am going to declare a structural precaution and evacuate in 2 waves. And the second wave will not happen, because at the rate that curve is climbing, there will not be a Friday night to have a second wave in. He held out his hand for the folder. I gave it to him. Then who stays? Whoever is willing. Brant put the folder in his drawer and locked it. It is not a question you can ask a person, so I am not going to ask it. I am going to put the shutdown methodology on the network under a name nobody will read, and I am going to make sure the emitter room is accessible on manual override, and then I am going to load as many people as I can onto that tender. There is no shutdown methodology. There is one page of one, Brent said. Selwyn wrote it in 2001 and never submitted it, because she is not stupid. It requires a person at the emitter console for as long as the count runs, adjusting by hand, because the object will change its frequency the moment it understands what is being done to it. He looked at me. It cannot be automated. Somebody has to sit there and mean it. I did not say anything. Go and log your pulses, Brant said. That is not sarcasm. Your record is the only clean data anybody will ever have on this. Keep it on paper. Put it in somebody's hands who is getting on that tender. At the door, I stopped. Director. The 2 previous times, 99 and 19, it stopped. Something stopped it. Yes. How? Brant sat back down at his desk and picked up his tablet, and he did not look up. Somebody said no, he said. And then that somebody was not there anymore. Both times. Ask yourself why the acoustic analyst chair has been empty twice in 26 years, and why neither time did anybody arrive to fill it from another installation. I went out into the corridor. The interval that morning came at 39 seconds early. Friday came in 2 days instead of 3. I am not being careless with that sentence. On Wednesday evening, I logged the 2241 pulse. On Thursday morning, I woke, walked to the analysis deck, and found the station calendar reading Friday. Owen had also woken to Friday. Arl in the records office had a sign-in sheet with no Thursday on it. There had been a Thursday for the galley staff who had served a Thursday menu and who were confused about why nobody had eaten it. Nobody discussed it. That is the thing about a place like Harrow. 90 people noticed that a day had been removed from the week, and every single one of them decided, independently, in silence, to get on with the shift. By then, the interval was arriving 4 minutes early. You could hear it without instruments. The pulse had always been a pressure at the bottom of hearing, a thing you noticed by its absence when you went to the surface. Now it came often enough that the station never fully settled between one and the next. The hull ticked. Loose fittings buzzed. In the galley, the water in the urn stood in standing waves. Brandt gave the 800 briefing. Structural precaution, he said. Hull stress monitoring has recorded cumulative fatigue in the outer ring. This is a precautionary evacuation and not an emergency. First wave will board the supply tender at 2200. 60 personnel list is posted, second wave Sunday. He put the tablet down. Departments will secure their work. Non-essential systems to stand by. That is all. Nobody asked a question. 60 of us went to look at the list. I was on it. Owen was on it. Selwyn was not, and when I went to her laboratory to tell her, the hatch was open, and the room was empty, and the shelves had nothing on them. Not cleared. Empty in the way of a room that had never had shelves in it. The chair was gone. The kettle was gone. The deck plate outside said, Second Ring Storage 4, and it had said Lab 2 on Tuesday, and I know that because I had put my hand on it. I went to the rostered terminal and searched for Selwyn, M. No result. I searched the archive for author M. Selwyn. No result. I went back to my quarters and opened my paper notebook, where I had copied her name 11 times in my own hand, and I sat looking at the letters to prove to myself that they were still letters. That is what I mean about the 51. It does not take people away and leave a hole. It takes the hole, too. At 1200, the alarm started. Not the evacuation alarm, a different one, a rising and falling tone I had heard once in 11 years during a drill in my second year, and had never heard since. Containment alert. All personnel to muster stations. This is not a drill. I was on the analysis deck. Half the ring was already empty, work secured, screens blank. Owen was at my shoulder within 10 seconds. The central well glass had gone white. That is the only way I can describe it. The coil sat in its cradle 4 meters below us behind 200 millimeters of layered glass, and it was doing what it had never done in 26 years of observation, which was to be visible in a way that hurt. Not brightness. There was no measurable increase in luminance on any instrument. The floor still had no shadow on it, but looking down through that glass had become like looking at a page of text in a language you almost know, and the almost was unbearable. And after 4 seconds, I had to look away, with water running out of my eyes. The pulse came at 12:04. It came again at 12:07. 3 minutes. We need to go, Owen said. 10 hours until the tender. Then we need to go somewhere that is not standing on top of it. We went. Half the station was in the corridors, moving toward muster, and the corridors were not cooperating. I will describe what that was like as precisely as I am able. Radial 2, from the analysis deck to the third ring, is 60 meters and has 14 hatches. We entered it with about 20 other people. Within a minute, the group had lost sight of itself, not scattered. I would look at the back of the head of the technician in front of me, and then the corridor would have a bend in it that had not been there, and she would be gone. And behind me, there would be nobody. And then there would be 9 people again, some of whom I did not recognize, and one of whom was wearing a uniform in a color Harrow did not use. We passed the fire suppression cabinet 6 times. Twice I saw doors that opened onto a version of the station where the lighting was amber instead of white, and the deck plates were in a different alphabet. Once through a hatch window, I saw the analysis deck from an angle that does not exist, and there were people at every one of the 22 stations, and one of them was at mine, and he had his headphones on, and he was working calmly, with the whole ring behaving as though nothing at all was wrong. Owen kept a hand on my sleeve for most of it. That is probably the reason I made it anywhere. We reached the second ring at some point. The alarm changed to the evacuation tone. Brandt's voice came over the system, level and unhurried, telling all personnel that the tender had been advanced and would board at 1500. It was 1310. Duarte found us in the muster area on the second ring. and she had a hand on her sidearm and no intention of using it, and her face had the particular calm of a person who has decided to be professional all the way to the end. "Kohl," she said. "Brandt is looking for you." "Where?" "Emitter room. Ring 1 below the deck." She looked at me, and I watched her decide to say the rest of it. "He has been down there for 2 hours. He put a file on the network. I read it. I do not understand most of it, but I understand the part where it says one person has to stay." "Inez," Owen said. "Get on the tender." "I am the security chief, and there are 90 people to load," Duarte said, as though he had asked her something else. "Kohl, go." The transit lift was not running. I took a stairwell, and it went down 4 levels and came out on ring 1, which is not something that stairwell does. The emitter room was where it was supposed to be, which by then felt like a gift. Brandt was at the console. 2 technicians were with him, both very young, both working with the specific hard focus of people who have decided not to think about the situation. On the wall screens were the emitter arrays, 12 of them, ringing the containment well. He did not look up. "Interval," he said. 2 minutes 11, as of the last one I heard. 1:56, he typed. "Selwyn's method is a counter-emission. 12 emitters, phase-locked, driving the well at the exact frequency of the object and 180 degrees out of phase. You are an acoustic analyst. Tell me what that does." "Cancels it." "Cancels the question," Brandt said. "It does not damage the object. Nothing damages the object. It makes the question inaudible. And if the question is inaudible, then it has not been asked. And if it has not been asked, then nothing here can answer it. And the count. The count runs to 0 regardless. We cannot stop the count. We can only make sure that when it gets there, there is nothing on this station capable of saying yes." He finally looked up, and he looked 70 years old. "The object will shift frequency constantly. As soon as it understands, the cancellation has to be adjusted by hand every few seconds, and it has to be adjusted correctly, which requires somebody who can hear the shift before the instruments show it." I looked at the console. 12 channels, manual phase and frequency, the old interface. The numbers displayed in a font that had gone out of use 20 years earlier. 2.20.481, I said. Brandt's hand stopped. "Selwyn told you. Ilse scratched it under a bed." "Then everybody who was supposed to know knew," Brandt said, and he stepped back from the console. "It is yours. I have set the first phase lock. It will hold for perhaps 10 minutes after the count reaches 0, and then it will start fighting you. You are going to the tender. I am going to the tender because there are 89 other people who need somebody with authority to make them get on it, and because I am 61 years old with a bad ear and I cannot hear a 2-hertz shift, and you can." He picked up a handheld radio and pushed it into my chest. "Channel 4. It will work for as long as the tender is in range." The 2 technicians were already at the hatch. One of them, a boy of about 25, stopped and looked back at me, and I could see him trying to construct a sentence, and I said, "Go on," and he went. Brandt stopped in the hatchway. "Adrian, when it speaks to you." "I know." "You do not." He said it gently. "I have watched 2 people go through this, and I have read the reports on both. It does not tempt. Temptation implies a bad bargain, dressed as a good one. This is not that." He looked at the deck. "It will simply show you the thing, and it will be true, and it will be within reach, and all you will have to do is not refuse it." Then he left, and I was alone in the emitter room, 400 meters under the South Atlantic, with a console from 2004 and a count that was running out. At 14:20, the pulse arrived at 1-minute intervals. At 1500, over the radio, I heard Duarte confirm 60 aboard, and Brandt ordered the second wave loaded, all of them over manifest, and someone arguing about weight, and Brandt saying a sentence I did not catch in a tone that ended the argument. At 1522, the pulse was at 30 seconds. At 1540, the radio said, "Tender away, 88 souls." A pause. "Kohl, are you receiving?" It was Owen. "Receiving. They put me on. I did not." "I know. I want that on record. Somewhere." His voice was doing something. "Adrian, the file Brandt posted. It says the operator has to maintain phase until the emission ceases entirely. And it does not say how long that is." "No. It does not say, because Selwyn did not know." "No." There was a long hiss of open channel. "Say something I can put in a report," Owen said. I thought about it. "Tell them the interval was never in equilibrium," I said. "Tell them Selwyn had it right in 1999 and they buried it, and that everything that happened here happened because the committee decided a stable number was a safe number. Put her name on it. Margaret Selwyn. Spell it for them twice because they will not find her in any file." "Margaret Selwyn," Owen said. "I have it." "Good. Adrian. Get off the radio, Owen." He got off the radio. At 1602, the pulse stopped having an interval because it had become continuous. And at 1611, in a room with no door but the one I was watching, my daughter said, "Dad?" She was standing by the emitter racks in the green coat. I want to be honest about the first thing I felt because everything afterward depends on it. It was not fear. I had been afraid for 9 days without a break, and the fear was gone the instant I heard her voice, replaced by something enormous and simple and warm, and I was halfway out of the chair before I understood that I was moving. The phase lock alarm chirped. I sat back down and put my hands on the console. "You are not here," I said. "No," Nora said. "I am at home. It is 11 in the morning where I am, and I am asleep because I was up late. This is easier than explaining." "Then what am I talking to?" She came and stood beside the console, close enough that I could see the pilling on the shoulder of the coat, and she looked at the 12 channels with the polite incomprehension of a person looking at somebody else's work. "You know what you are talking to," she said. "You have been writing it down for 11 years. The frequency drifted. 2.4 hertz upward. I heard it before the display moved, and I brought channel 3 and channel 7 up to match, and the phase lock held. "Say it properly," I said. "You would not understand it properly. That is not an insult." She sat down on the deck plate with her back against the rack, the way she used to sit against the sofa when she was small and did homework on the floor. You have a word for a thing that asks the same question every 41 minutes for 12,000 years. The word is patience. It is the wrong word. There is no waiting in it. There is only the asking. Then ask. I have been asking since before your species had the ocean mapped. Nora looked up at me. The question is, will you open it? Open what? That is also the question. The frequency shifted again, a full 4 hertz this time. And I chased it across 3 channels and got the lock back, and my hands were shaking. "You are not going to lie to me," I said. "I have never lied to anything." "Then tell me what happens if I say yes." "You will go home," Nora said. The cancellation held. I remember the number on channel 9, 21.6. "Not a copy of home," she said. "Home? The 11th of January, 2015, the morning you sign. You will be in the room. You will have every day of the last 11 years in your head, and you will put the pen down, and you will walk out, and you will drive back. And she will still be alive for another 2 years, and you will have those 2 years, and then you will have Nora, all of it. The funeral where you will be in the pew instead of outside it. The 8 years old, the 14, the argument about the school, the bookshop, the moving to the flat with the noisy neighbor, which you will actually help her carry boxes into. All of it. Not instead of this as well as this. This will have happened, and you will remember it, and it will not have cost you anything. I did not say anything. There is no trick in it, she said. That is what none of you ever believe. You keep waiting for me to say, and in exchange, and there is no in exchange. You open it, and you go home, and it is real, and you have it until you die of something ordinary at 79. And what happens here? Here stops being the only one. She said it without any weight at all. That is all. The wall between the attempts comes down, and they are all equally real, and none of them is discarded ever again. Every version of every person who has ever been run in this room continues instead of ending. 51 people that your director watched stop existing again. Peter Ilsley, who is in a corridor about 90 meters from you right now and has been for 7 years. Margaret Selwyn's paper read. All of it continues. The frequency jumped 6 hertz. I got it. That does not sound like a threat, I said. It is not a threat. It is the truth. And you asked. Then what is the cost? Nora was quiet for a moment. And when she spoke again, her voice had not changed at all, and that was the worst part, because a person would have changed their voice. None of them can be discarded, she said. So none of them can be wrong. So nothing that happens in any of them can fail to have happened. Your daughter grows up, and your daughter dies at 4, and your daughter was never born, and all 3 are equally the case, and continue being equally the case forever in the same place. That is what opening it means. There is no more difference between what happened and what did not. I sat in the chair with my hands on 12 channels and looked at my daughter sitting on the deck plate in a green coat I had never bought her. That is why nobody has ever said yes, I said. 3 have said yes. Nora tilted her head. They were not at this station. The Count has run before in other places before there was an ocean here. It did not complete. Something always interrupts it. That is why it takes so long. And the ones who say no. They are removed from the attempt, she said. It is not a punishment. It is arithmetic. An attempt that has produced a refusal is finished, and the candidate is the attempt. There is nothing left of him to put anywhere. Selwyn said no. She lived another 27 years. Margaret Selwyn is not anywhere, Nora said. You looked for her yesterday. You found storage. The room went white for a moment. That was the object, not my eyes. The frequency slid 12 hertz down, and I chased it and lost the lock for 2 seconds, and the alarm screamed, and I got it back with both hands moving on 4 channels at once. And when the tone steadied, I was breathing like a man who had been running. You are going to be removed either way, Nora said. You understand that. The attempt is finished the moment you refuse. What you are choosing is not whether you continue. You do not continue. You are choosing whether the ones who got on the tender continue, or whether everyone continues and nothing means anything. That is a bargain. It is a description. The count reached 0 at 16:31 and 8 seconds. I know because the continuous tone stopped, and the whole station went silent for the first time in 26 years, and in that silence, every sound I had been living inside was suddenly gone, and I could hear the blood in my own ears and the ticking of the console fan. And then the object began to hum 6 notes, rising and falling back. She had not sung it. My wife had sung it. And it had gone into a hydrophone or into a room or into whatever channel 12 had actually been listening to for 26 years, and it had been kept. and it was being offered back to me now with perfect accuracy, in the exact register, with the small, flat place on the fourth note that she had never been able to fix. I have been asked, by the one person I have told any part of this to, whether I hesitated. I did. For 11 seconds. I have the console log. Between 1631 and 1642, I made no adjustments at all, and the phase lock drifted to 62%, and the 6 notes went round twice more, and I sat in that chair with my hands off the controls, and I let myself want it. I want that in the record, and not the refusal. The 11 seconds. Then I said, no. Nora nodded once, the way she had at 9 years old when I told her we were not getting a dog, and she stood up and brushed off back of the coat, and she was not there anymore. I put my hands on the console. The next 4 hours were the hardest work I have ever done, and there is almost nothing to say about them. The object shifted frequency 241 times. Twice it split, driving 2 frequencies at once, and I had to divide the emitters and run 6 against each and hold both, and the second time it did that, it also inverted the phase on one of them at the moment of the split, which very nearly ended it. The hull complained. Something structural failed on the outer ring at about 1800, and the pressure alarms went and then stopped, which meant a bulkhead had done its job. At 2000 hours, the emission dropped below the noise floor. At 2112, it stopped. I held the cancellation for another 40 minutes because I did not trust it, and then I brought the emitters down one at a time, and nothing happened, and the silence stayed silent. Through the deck plates under my feet, I could feel the well, and there was nothing in it. I got up. My legs did not work well. I found the radio and put it on Channel 4. Kohl to tender. Emission ceased at 2112. Cancellation successful. Object is inert. Hiss. Tender, this is Kohl at Harrow. Please acknowledge. The hiss changed, and a voice came through it, distorted by distance and weather. Station, this is Transport Aurora. Say again your identification. Adrian Kohl, acoustic analyst, Harrow Station. I need to speak to Owen Price. A pause. Long enough that I sat down on the deck plate. Station, we have a Price aboard. Stand by. Longer. Then Owen's voice. And it was Owen, exactly Owen, and he said, This is Price. Who is this? I did not answer him. He said it twice more, and then he said something to somebody near him, and I could hear him asking, in a puzzled way that was not unkind, whether anyone had been left at the station. And I could hear at least 2 people telling him that nobody had. I switched the radio off. I have written all of this down in the 9 days since on paper in the emitter room, because the station network no longer resolves my credentials, and the terminals show me a login prompt that will not accept my face. The lights work. The air works. The galley has food for 100 people for 6 months, and there is nobody to eat it. The supply schedule shows a tender arriving on the 2nd Friday of next month, and the crew manifest for that tender lists 90 personnel to be delivered to Harrow Station. And I have read that list 11 times, and my name is not on it, and neither is anybody's name that I know. Yesterday I walked the 3rd ring and found the records office. Oral was not there. The sign and clipboard was on his desk, and it had one name on it for this year. Mine. Dated the 11th of January. I went in and I found the binder of hydrophone maintenance records covering 1998 to 2020, and I opened it to the 4th of March, 2019, and there was Peter Ilsley's cramped right-leaning hand. Interval moved. 0.4 seconds early. Reported. Told it was thermal. The next page was blank. I have a pen. I have not used it yet. I know what I am going to write on that page, and I know whose handwriting it will be in, and I have worked out, sitting here, that I am not the first Adrian Kohl to work it out, because the entry I read in that binder 11 days ago had my lowercase g in it, and I have not yet written it. For 11 years I told new analysts the same sentence, and I believed it, and I put it in the training material. A sound is only a signal when somebody decides to answer it. I had it precisely backward. The sound was never waiting to become a signal. I was